there's some very evil and diabolical network that's in the world. It's in the Western world. It's in Europe. And they want nationalism to be revived. Now, here is something I wanted to tell you guys about. I was talking about this with my dad last night, and my dad made a very, very good point. Why is the algorithm so friendly to anti-Israel opinions? Why is it that when I did my video speculating that perhaps Israel had something to do with Charlie Kirk's murder, that the algorithm pushed that video to the point where it got hundreds of thousands of views? And if you look at the analytics for that video, you can't look at it unless you have some kind of a program to see YouTube analytics. But if you look at the analytics for that Charlie Kirk video that I did, the one that got hundreds of thousands of views, YouTube recommended that video. How many people did YouTube recommend this video to? 1.7 million people. YouTube recommended that video to 1.7 million people. Why would the algorithm be so generous? Why would YouTube's algorithm, which is controlled by Google, be so generous to a video that goes against the pro-Israel narrative? Ask yourself that. Why is the algorithm so friendly to Candace Owens? Why is the algorithm so friendly to Nick Fuentes? Why is the algorithm so friendly and so generous to Tucker Carlson? Why is the algorithm so generous to Dave Smith? Why? You could say, well, it's because those people's opinions are very popular. Yes, that is correct. I would agree with you. But still, even though they're popular, they still go against this country that the American government has been getting people to support for decades. So why would the algorithm be so helpful to those videos? I have a theory as to why this is. So I'll tell you guys a story. So back in 2014 and 2015, ISIS was running Iraq. And they were killing a lot of people. Beheading people, burning people alive, drowning people. Very demonic stuff. Very sick, satanic, demonic stuff. I hated it. Absolutely hated what I was watching. I began to post on ISIS. And when I started posting on ISIS and what ISIS was doing, my posts were getting at least hundreds of thousands of views. Sometimes tens of thousands, but many times they were getting hundreds of thousands of views, sometimes millions of views. And our website, shootbot.com, was getting a ton of views. The algorithm was very, very generous. And we didn't really understand the algorithm or how any of that stuff worked. We just knew that our website was getting a lot of views. Why was the algorithm so friendly to these posts? And it turns out that people who were running in those times, 2014, 2015, 2016, the people who were running pro-MAGA, pro-Trump blogs were getting tons of views. They would just post one article on Facebook. Boom, hundreds of thousands of views, millions of views. It was huge. Why? Something becomes popular in the algorithm because the powers that be want it to become popular. This is my conspiracy theory. This is what I believe. The powers that be, the Pentagon, people in the government, people in the security apparatus, they wanted the news on ISIS to be spread wide and far. They wanted those very disturbing stories to go viral. Why? Because those disturbing stories were used to justify another American bombardment in Iraq. Those disturbing stories were used to revive nationalism in Europe, which is something that the CIA has wanted to do going all the way back to the Cold War's Gladio operation. The United States has been wanting to see a revival of nationalism in Europe for decades. So you had the refugee crisis, You had ISIS killing people at the same time. The European far right was saying, look at what these ISIS guys are doing. This is why we have to have nationalism. And it was very effective. And the funny thing, not the funny thing, I don't want to say any of this stuff is funny because it's not. But the strange thing, the bizarre thing, was that ISIS never attacked Israel. That's the thing about ISIS that was so strange, is that here they were, right? Hardcore Muslims, hardcore Islamists. They're waving the black flag of Islam, but yet never attacked Israel. They accidentally fired on Israel, and they immediately called up Israel, and they apologized to Israel, but they never deliberately attacked Israel. And they were very anti-Palestine. ISIS was very anti-Hamas. People like to say that Hamas and ISIS are the same, but ISIS hated Hamas. So if Hamas was this hardcore Islamist organization, ISIS would have been aligned with them, but they weren't. And in fact, ISIS wanted to destroy Hamas. ISIS hated the pro-Palestine movement, because according to ISIS, the pro-Palestine movement was not truly Islamist. And in a way, it's not really entirely Islamist. The pro-Palestine movement is a mixture of secularists and Islamist. You have people in the pro-Palestine movement who have no interest in Islam. They're secularists. They want to see a secular Palestinian state. And a lot of Palestinian people are secularists. A lot of Palestinian people are not hardcore Islamist. They're just not. But ISIS hated them. So it made you wonder what the hell was going on here. And then you look at ISIS's high definition slaughter videos where they're filming themselves killing people in the most brutal ways, but they're filming in a style that's like something out of a Hollywood movie. Very professional cameras, very professional camera work, very professional camera directing. It was like you were watching a movie. How did they get their hands on that? Who was directing all these films? What's going on? Who's doing the editing work? So then it makes you realize, okay, there's some sort of a NATO conspiracy going on here. And that is why the algorithm was pushing for any posts on ISIS to go viral. That's why. That's why Google helped any posts that were on ISIS to go viral. And we all know who controls Google. The government controls Google. Facebook is controlled by the government. And I remember posting stuff on ISIS on my Facebook page, boom, would get tens of thousands of impressions, hundreds of thousands of impressions sometimes on Facebook. Facebook is controlled by the government. What's happening here? What was happening was the government, NATO, the powers that be, whatever you want to call them, the New World Order, whatever you want to call it, wanted people to see what ISIS was doing to spark a nationalistic sentiment in the Western world. And it was also very helpful to Donald Trump's campaign. When Donald Trump was running for his first term, that ISIS stuff, all the stuff about ISIS was greatly helping him. Because he said, look, ISIS, Obama created ISIS. I'm here to fight ISIS. I'm going to fight this. I'm going to fight this. You don't want ISIS in America. And there were all these people on the internet. There were tons of people on the internet talking about ISIS coming to America. Oh my God, ISIS is going to cross the border. We need Donald Trump. And it helped Donald Trump. So the algorithm was actually helping Trump. All the ISIS stuff was helping Trump. All the carnage that ISIS was doing was helping the far right in America and in Europe. And I remember, crazy story, I remember I was in Spain in the spring of 2015. It was either in the spring or early summer, but I was in Spain in 2015, and I was in Madrid for a conservative, basically a conservative youth event. And I did my speech on the importance of Christian identity in the world. Now, I did not promote any sort of European far-right ideology, but I did talk about the importance of Christian identity in order to bring back Christian civilization. And I did my speech. And I sat down, and when the event was this, when all the speaking was over, we had a very nice dinner. They hired a catering service to make dinner for everyone, and there was a beautiful, very delicious paella that was made for us. So I'm eating my paella, which is delicious. And this, before I start eating, this lady approaches me. She's the organizer of the event, and she says, "Ted, the guy who funded this meeting, he really loves what you have to say. He really loves what you said in your speech, and he wants to have dinner with you. He wants to eat dinner with you at your table." And I said, "Okay." So I meet this dude. His name is Victor. I keep confusing Gonzalez with Rodriguez. Victor Gonzalez. That was his name. Very, very tall Spaniard. We shook hands. He said, "I really like what you had to say, Theodore." We sat down and we spoke for a good 2 hours or so. We had dinner. We were talking. And I said to him, "So what do you do for a living?" And he said, "I help run a political party." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "What's the name of the party?" He says, "It's called Vox. 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 It's called Vox." I said, "Wow, that's cool." And I said, "How many seats in parliament do you have?" He says, "So far we have no seats, but soon you will see. The Vox party will be one of the biggest parties in all of Spain. You will see, I assure you." He was very confident, very assured of himself. And I said, "What makes you so confident?" And he said, "Because there are millions of people like me all over Spain. Millions of people, you will see." And he starts telling me about how he's preparing for a war, basically a civil war in Spain. Really? He said, "I am encouraging the Spanish government to fight ISIS in the Middle East, to go to the Middle East to fight ISIS. Because if we do not fight ISIS in the Middle East, then we will have to fight them here in the streets of Spain. So I am preparing for a war here in Spain." And I said, "Well, how are you preparing?" And this is where things got even weirder. He says, "Well, currently I'm involved in paramilitary training. And I'm currently involved in training with the Spanish Special Forces." Spanish Special Forces, you say? He says, "Yeah." He says, "The Spanish Special Forces." I said, "Really?" He says, "Yes." He says, now this guy was no fat ass. You can look up his name, Victor Gonzalez, VOX, Vox Party. You'll see his picture. He's not a fat ass. This guy is very tall, and he's very lanky. He says, "I have a black belt in, I think he said he had a black belt in judo or taekwondo." He said, "I did judo for 10 years or taekwondo for 15 years or something like that." And I mean, the guy looked like he could fight. He's not a weak looking guy. And he said, "I'm currently training with the Spanish Special Forces, and we are jumping off of planes and using parachutes. We're parachuting off planes. We're getting prepared." So, okay, it's 2015. I'm 24 years old. And I'm hearing Spanish Special Forces, and this guy's training, and I'm thinking, I've never heard of something like this before. And he says to me, "I am currently a member of a very secretive religious order. And we are preparing for a war here in Spain. And we are working with the Spanish Special Forces. But it's a Catholic, as the Spanish say. The Spanish have a very heavy accent. Catholic. We're working with the Catholic Church. We have not the church, sorry." He said, I'm a member of a Catholic order, and I'm training with the Special Forces. Word? Yeah. This guy was serious. He was dead serious. And he gave me his card. He says, "Here's my card. You can give me a call." And I said, "Well, can I interview you about this?" And he said, "I will have to ask my spiritual father in the order for permission to do so." Okay. So I go back to the States and I gave this dude a call. And he said, "Hello, Theodore." He says, "Yes, yes, I will be going to Houston. That's how they can't say Houston. They say Houston. I will be going to Houston next month to work with a friend of mine. I'm going to be meeting with a friend of mine. He is from Guatemala. I think it was Guatemala. And we're going to be doing some talking together and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Cool, cool." So we talked for a little bit. And then maybe a week or so later, I gave him another call. And he goes, "Oh, yes, hola, Theodore. Yes, I remember. Yes, Theodore. Yes, absolutely." And I said, "Hey, Victor, I really want to interview you about this order, and you're doing this training. I think that would be so cool to talk about for an interview. Our website, shootbot.com, gets tons of views every month. We get millions of views every month. And I think it would be so cool to talk to you so that you can tell the audience about your order and your training with the Spanish Special Forces." And he says, "Well, I'm going to have to ask for permission from my spiritual father for the permission. I cannot just do an interview just like that, you know. I have to talk to the spiritual father who's a part of the order, the head of the order." So that was my last phone. That was one of my last phone conversations with him. It was very interesting was that when I was at the dinner in Madrid where I first met him, the organizer of the event told me, she was a little short, fat Spanish woman, and she was very pro-Israel. Love Israel. Yes, yes, God is with Israel. Dios con Israel. And she told me that during the dinner, she said, "You know, that guy, Victor, he funded all this." She told me that. He funded this whole event. And she said, "You know, Victor, he make a lot of money." He makes a lot of money? Yes, he make a lot of money. He work in the oil business. Works in the oil business. Yes, he work in the petroleum oil business. So when I got back to the States, I looked him up, and sure enough, this guy did work in the oil business. She wasn't lying. But it was very strange that this traditional Catholic, who was a member of this secretive militant Catholic order, was funding a pro-Christian Zionist Christian group in Spain. So one day I get an email from a member of this Zionist group in Spain, this Spanish evangelical group. And this email was very nasty. And it said, "Theodore, we notice that you wrote an article defending the Catholic Eucharist. Now, we believe that the Eucharist is idolatry and is not true Christianity. So, if you persist on defending Catholic idolatry, we will have to tell you that we will no longer be working with you." And my exact words to him were, "Cut the crap," or something like that. And they never wrote back to me. So I gave a call to Victor. This was my last conversation with Victor. I called him up and I said, he goes, "Hey, hola, hey, Theodore, how you doing?" And I said, "Victor, I just want to let you know that this group that you're funding is extremely anti-Catholic. And they just gave me an email trying to pressure me to stop defending the Eucharist. So I'm just letting you know, because from one Catholic to another, I'm just letting you know that you're funding a group that hates your religion. I'm just letting you know." And he says, "Well, you know, Theodore, thank you for telling me this. You know, as a Catholic, this is my Catholic faith is very important to me. So this is very important. Yeah, thank you for telling me this. You know, okay, thank you for telling me this. Okay, goodbye, Victor." Never heard from him again. Tried writing him, never wrote me back. So then, that was in 2016, I want to say, when I had that last conversation with him, early 2016, maybe late 2015. I want to say early 2016. So then fast forward to 2018. Yeah. Fast forward to 2018. I meet a Spanish journalist, Catholic Spanish journalist, who was very critical of Israel. And at this point, I had become much more critical of Israel. I had become very disillusioned with Israel. So I meet this Spanish journalist who's very critical of Israel. And we're talking, and I tell this woman, it's a woman, it's not a guy. I tell this woman this story that I'm explaining to you. I tell this story I tell her the story about Victor Gonzalez and Vox, and without even telling her that Vox was funding this pro-Israel group, the Spanish journalist tells me, "Oh, let me tell you something about the far-right politicians in Europe." She said they're all Zionists. And I heard that, and I thought, huh, interesting. She said they're all Zionists. So I tell her the story about this guy being a member of this secretive militant Catholic order. And she says, "Oh, I think I know what you're talking about." She said, "There is a paramilitary order in Spain called El Yunque." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yes." She said, she said, "More than likely, Victor Gonzalez is a member of El Yunque." And she said they're connected to Vox, or I think she said she's pretty certain they're connected to Vox. And she said it's a paramilitary group. So I started looking more into this stuff. And it turns out that there is a connection between Vox and this far-right paramilitary order called El Yunque. By the way, Yunque is Spanish for anvil, like the anvil from the Looney Tunes. That's what Yunque means. So El Yunque means the anvil. And they're a paramilitary group in Spain, but they have a branch in Mexico. And she said more than likely he's a part of El Yunque. Interesting. Very interesting. And eventually Vox becomes one of the biggest parties in Spain. I think Vox right now, let me just check real quick. Vox party, they are currently the third largest party in Spain. So this Victor Gonzalez guy wasn't kidding. I think his confidence was pretty well founded. He said, we will become one of the biggest parties in Spain. And currently they are the third largest party in Spain. When I met Victor Gonzalez, no one knew who Vox was. Vox was a nothing party that had 0 seats in the Spanish parliament. Now they're the third largest party in Spain. So I start looking more into this whole thing. And I start finding out about this group of people in Europe called the Templars. That there is a paramilitary organization in Europe called the Templars. Yeah. And it's very interesting because in 2000 and I want to say, let me think. In 2016 or 17, I want to say, if I remember correctly, our organization received a letter from a group of people calling itself the Templars, saying that they were, I want to say, if I remember correctly, they said they were located in Italy. And they were saying that they wanted to work with us. They didn't really explain how they wanted to work with us, but they said, we would like to collaborate with you guys. And our agent at the time was telling me this, that there's a group and they sent me this letter and they call themselves the Templars. They're in Italy, blah, blah, blah. And I had a friend who was involved in far-right activism in Italy. I had a friend. He was involved in this stuff. Very strange story. So I knew this guy. His name was Tommaso. Tommaso was a far-right activist. We were kind of friends. I interviewed Tommaso back in 2014 about his activities and things like that. And Tommaso was very familiar with the world of right-wing politics in Italy. And I called them up, or I wrote him, and I said, Tommaso, there's this group in Italy calling itself the Templars, and they want to work with us. Have you ever heard of this? And he said, there are numerous groups in Europe that call themselves Templars. He said, some of them are fake, some of them are bullshit, some of them are genuine. And I think he told me there was one group in Italy that was genuine. And that's all he told me. That's all he told me. Very strange thing about that young man was I remember trying to write him and he just wouldn't write back to me, which was unusual. And no matter how many times I wrote this guy, he just would not write back to me, which was very unusual because he always wrote back to me. And I remember looking him up, Tommaso, and I found this story in the local Italian news that said this young man named Tommaso was found dead in his apartment. I thought, Tommaso's dead? And what got me to look him up was one day I received a message from his Facebook account. And the picture, this is such a strange story. The message was a picture of Tommaso's tombstone. And I'm guessing this message was sent to me by his wife. So I'm like, oh my God, Tommaso's dead. So I went into Google, I looked it up, and I found a story that they found this young man in his apartment dead. And the doctor said he died from cancer. Now, this guy was in his 30s. He was in good shape. I thought, that seems really weird. He was found dead and he died. The doctor said, oh, he died from cancer. He was dropped dead in his apartment. It could be true. I don't know. But I knew a journalist, my Spanish journalist friend. She lived in Rome for many years, and she was quite familiar with how things worked in Italy and how corrupt Italy is and all that stuff. And I gave her a call and I sent her the article and I said, what do you think of this story? And she read the story and she said, I'm afraid your friend was murdered. I said, well, how do you know? And she said, well, Italy is a very corrupt country. And she said, the media is totally controlled by the mafia. And she said, when a murder is done nefariously, when a murder is done and the ones who have done the murder don't want the media to say that it was a murder, the media will say that it was cancer. She said, let me tell you something, Tim. She said, when the mafia kills people here in Italy, the media will report that the person died from cancer. This is what she told me. This is a code word. She said, I'm afraid your friend was murdered. Very strange story. Very strange story. But anyway, so I started looking into these groups that this Tommaso guy told me about, Templars and all this stuff. And it turns out that there are numerous groups in Europe that identify as Templars, or they at least say that they are Templars or whatever. And Anders Breivik, the guy who did one of the biggest mass shootings in history, said that he was recruited by a group called the Templars in Serbia. Yeah, really strange. So then there's a group that calls itself the Templars. This is a fucking crazy story, guys. I'm telling you, you guys are going to think that I'm lying to you. You can't. You can think I'm lying. This is the God honest truth. But they're headquartered in, I think, fucking Scotland somewhere. And it turns out that this group has ties to Serbian nationalists. So this Anders Breivik guy was talking about being recruited by the Templars, and he said that he met someone from this organization. This guy was from Serbia, and they got Serbian nationalists who are members of this Templar group that's headquartered in Scotland or the UK somewhere. And this Serbian politician, who was, I'm not sure if she still is, but she was a member of parliament, and she said, there's a group called the Templars, and they're in Serbia, and they're violent terrorists. And she started getting threats, and there was graffiti that was found somewhere in Serbia saying, you're going to die, and they put her name on there. They were threatening her and all this stuff. And she said, there is a group called the Templars, and it's in Serbia, and they're fucking terrorists. So there's something to be said. So, but fast forward to 2015, I meet this Victor Gonzalez guy at this conservative youth event in Madrid, Spain. He's telling me about this secretive Catholic order that's preparing for a civil war. And get this, they were doing paramilitary training with the Spanish special forces. Now, let me tell you, you cannot do special paramilitary training with the special forces unless the government consents to that. That doesn't happen just by itself. Someone in the higher upper echelon of power has to consent to this. So fast forward to 2017. I find this book called NATO's Secret Armies by a guy named David Ganser, who is a Swiss historian. Guys, if you have not read this book, you need to read this book. I can tell you right now, I've already recommended a book. I have recommended Josephus's Judean War, the history of the Roman Judean War. I highly recommend that everyone read that book, a masterpiece of a book. But I also highly recommend that people read the book NATO's Secret Armies by David Ganser. I highly recommend it. I read this book in 2017. I could not put it down. The whole book was about how the CIA and British intelligence and German intelligence and all these European intelligence agencies from the 1940s after World War II going all the way up until the 1990s were backing these far-right paramilitary groups. And the book talks about how they were backing neo-Nazis, far-right nationalists, all these different types of people. They were backing and arming them. NATO's intelligence agencies were backing and arming these guys because they wanted these guys to do terrorist attacks in Europe so that people would think that the terrorist attacks were done by the left. Yes. Puts Charlie Kirk's story in some perspective, if you know what I mean. Puts 9/11 in perspective. Puts JFK's assassination in perspective. Puts Operation Northwoods in perspective. The book goes on to talk about how the CIA was working directly with this group that was in the Vatican. I kid you not. There was a secretive organization in the Vatican. I gotta find the exact name of Propaganda Due. Propaganda Due. Due is spelled D-U-E. And according to Wikipedia, it says here that Propaganda Due was a Masonic lodge founded in 1877 within the tradition of continental Freemasonry. And this group was working directly with the CIA. And they had ties to the Vatican. And it makes you wonder about the attempted assassination of John Paul II. What the hell was that about? Well, if I had to make an assumption, a conspiratorial assumption here, I'm going to say that the CIA was trying to fulfill the Fatima prophecy. Fatima prophecy. The Fatima prophecy stated, this was okay, so let's backtrack a little bit here. There's something in the Catholic world called the Fatima visions, or the vision of Fatima. And what this involved was this little girl back in the early 1900s, or somewhere around there, had a vision of the Virgin Mary somewhere in Portugal, and the Virgin Mary gave her a prophecy. So this is what the story says. I don't believe it's true. I think that it's some sort of a satanic influence, but this is what the story says. This is what the lore says. So, according to the Fatima account, the Virgin Mary appeared to this little girl in Portugal. The Virgin Mary then told her a prophecy, and the prophecy was that a pope at some point in the future is going to be assassinated. The Pope will be assassinated, and it's going to be basically some sort of a harbinger to some sort of apocalyptic catastrophe, something like that, if I remember correctly. So Catholics were waiting for this prophecy that a Pope was going to be assassinated. Well, all of a sudden, some Turkish guy decides to assassinate John Paul II, shoots John Paul II. He survives. My guess is that the CIA wanted to fulfill the prophecy of Fatima, or to make it at least seem that the prophecy was fulfilled, to get the entire Catholic world on the side of NATO. They were trying to win the Catholic world. Because remember, there was this whole battle going on between Marxists and nationalists in the Vatican. That's why, for example, during the Gladio operation, John Paul II was working with these right-wing clergy leaders because they were trying to battle the Marxist clergy people in the Catholic world. So America was deeply involved in all that because America did not want to lose the Catholic world. So my guess is that the attempted assassination of John Paul II was a CIA psyop, and they wanted to make it look like they wanted to make it look like the Fatima prophecy had been fulfilled. That's what they were trying to do, in my opinion. But also, let's keep in mind that this group that had ties to the Vatican identified itself with the Masonic Lodge. Now, what does the Masonic Lodge love to tie itself to? What does it love to connect itself with? The Knights Templar, the Templars, all that stuff. So there's some very evil and diabolical network that's in the world. It's in the Western world. It's in Europe. And they want nationalism to be revived. That's why you read about Gladio. Read David Ganser's book on Gladio, NATO's Secret Armies. Great book. He gets into the details of the Gladio operation, what it was about. And what it was about was this. What it was about was reviving nationalism in NATO, in the NATO countries. They wanted to see nationalism. And that meant actually backing neo-Nazis in Germany, in Italy, in Belgium, and in various parts of Europe. And that also meant backing the Grey Wolves nationalists in Turkey. And that's exactly what they did. So there is a diabolical conspiracy to revive nationalism. And I think going back to ISIS and how Google was making all these posts on ISIS go viral, I believe that was done by design to get people to become nationalistic. And to a great extent, it worked because of ISIS, because of the migrant crisis, nationalism did revive in Western Europe. Vox became the third biggest party in Spain as a result of the migrant crisis, as a result of what was happening in the Middle East, etc. So now that I've explained all this, now let's apply what I've just explained to what's happening in the world right now in regards to this massive tidal wave against Israel. Why is it that Google makes posts against Israel go viral? Why is it that X does the same thing? Why is it that Facebook does this? Why is it that YouTube does this? If the government is so filled with Zionists, why are they enabling all these posts against Israel to become popular? Why is it? Why would they allow Elon Musk to permit X to be this platform where anti-Israel stuff can become so viral if they're so pro-Israel? I believe what is happening. Now, the politicians are very pro-Israel, 100%. I agree. But the anti-Israel stuff is growing by leaps and bounds. Most of our politicians are pro-Israel. That is a fact. But remember, there are people in the security apparatus or the intelligence apparatus of America who are not pro-Israel. If you look at videos with John Kiriakou was an American CIA agent. And he makes it very clear, the CIA has never really liked Israel. The CIA does not trust Israel because every single time Mossad agents give CIA agents gifts, those gifts are always tapped to spy on the CIA. So the CIA doesn't like Israel. Not everyone in the Pentagon is pro-Israel. So perhaps, I could be wrong, but perhaps what's happening is they want Israel to be hated. Perhaps what's happening is that they are forces within the U.S. government, in the security apparatus, in the intelligence apparatus, in the Pentagon, who want to really cut off ties with Israel. And perhaps that is why so much of the anti-Israel stuff goes viral. Now you can make the argument and say, but Ted, Trump just arranged this whole thing for Larry Eliason to basically control TikTok. And yeah, that's true. That's why I say I could be wrong. But YouTube is under the control of the government. YouTube is part of Google. And you see so much anti-Israel stuff being viral on YouTube. Why would they allow that? I think that there is a greater conspiracy here. Now, why would the United States want for America, or why would certain forces in the United States want for Israel to be cut off? Why? Well, think about it. The whole world is hating Israel. The great majority of people in Japan, we're talking at least 80% of the Japanese population, hates Israel. The majority of people in Europe hate Israel. A lot of the people in allied countries, in countries that are allied to the United States, hate Israel. America still loves or still supports Israel. But do you know who else hates Israel? Russia and China. They're both very critical of Israel. And which are the two powers that are the biggest threats to the United States and to the American empire? Russia and China. So perhaps the Americans are thinking, do we really want to be dragged down by Israel? Do we really want to see the whole world go against America because of our support for Israel? Because Russia is going against Israel, China is against Israel, Latin America is against Israel, Japan is against Israel, all of these European countries are against Israel. So all of the populations for all these countries. I mean, look, in Spain, they just had 300,000 people take to the streets of, sorry, not in Spain, in Italy. 300,000 people took to the streets of Rome. Just today. Just recently. 300,000 people on the streets of Rome for Palestine, not for Israel. 100,000 people in the streets of Milan. 2 million people in Italy participated in demonstrations against Israel just recently. 60% of Italy's population, or at least its working population, took part in a workers' strike, slowing down all of the businesses, or many of the businesses in Italy. That's huge. The vast majority of Italians, the vast majority of the population of Italy, which is an American ally, is against Israel. So the populations of Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, right? The populations of Europe, population of Japan, populations of Latin America, they all are overwhelmingly against Israel. Do you know who else is against Israel? The only two countries that can defeat America, Russia and China. So perhaps the Americans are looking at all this and they're thinking, wait a second. The populations of all of these allied countries could start wanting to be allies to our greatest enemies, Russia and China. Do we really want all of these countries that are supposed to be in our sphere of influence going to the side of Russia and China because we are so adamantly pro-Israel? Are we really going to allow Israel to drag us into this position of being a pariah while the rest of the world sides with China and Russia because China and Russia are pro-Palestine? Do we really want that? America is very much focused on making sure that the world likes America. They don't want Japanese people to hate America. They don't want Dutch people to hate America. They don't want Germans to hate America. They want those populations to be pro-America. But if these populations start saying, hey, Russia is for Palestine, China is for Palestine, we're going to be pro-Russia, we're going to be pro-China. America doesn't want that. America wants to win the hearts and minds of all those people. They don't want to lose those people because losing those people would eventually mean losing those countries. They don't want that. So perhaps There are discussions happening in the Pentagon in which these people who are in the higher echelons of power are saying, I think it's time. I mean, we got Israel bombing a major U.S. ally, Qatar. Do we really want to sit here and support that? Do we really want to sit here and support this country that doesn't mind crossing red lines? We don't want that. Do we really want to get dragged into a war with Iran, which is the idea of which is extremely unpopular? Do we really want this? Do we want to lose the Japanese population? Do we want to lose the favor of the populations of all these allied countries because we want to wave the Israeli flag and hump the Wailing Wall? And then you see the tide turning against AIPAC. You see more and more Democrats saying, no, we're not going to be so close to AIPAC as we were before. We see Hakeem Jeffries for the first time saying, I think I'll take the endorsement of J Street, which is critical of Israel. We see Hakeem Jeffries saying, I think I'm not going to make the annual trip to Israel like before. Because Israel is losing popularity. And the whole world is turning on Israel. Does America want the whole world to turn on America as well because of Israel? I don't think they want that. So what's happening? Look at what's happening in Germany. You see the German police beating up pro-Palestine activists all the time, punching them in the face, just brutally beating them up. But yet you don't see German police officers acting as brutally towards neo-Nazi demonstrators, members of the German and Austrian identitarian movement. You don't see the German police acting as brutally against Nazis as they do against pro-Palestine protesters. Why? Perhaps it's because as pro-Palestine sentiment increases in popularity, more and more people are going to look at the German police and say, there's something seriously wrong with our system. Italians are looking at Meloni and they're saying, Meloni, baloney, you know damn well the majority of Italians support Palestine. Why aren't you supporting Palestine with us? Are you here for the will of the people or are you here for the will of Israel? Do we really have sovereignty or not? This is what I said in one of my last videos. I said, it's not just about Gaza. The pro-Palestine stuff is not just about Gaza. It's about sovereignty at the end of the day. It's about having national interests take priority over the interest of Israel. That's what this is about at the end of the day. So people are saying, okay, Meloni, are you really here for the will of the people, the Italian people, or are you here for the will of Israel? People in Spain are saying the same thing. People in Germany are saying the same thing. And eventually what's going to happen is a global intifada, a global uprising against this post-World War II pro-Israel status quo. And you're going to see Hitlers being elected. And they're going to be saying, to hell with Israel. We're done with Israel. We're done with this Zionist power. We're done with the pro-Israel donors. We're done. We're done with these people trying to control us with their money. And eventually Israel will be doomed. And as I've said many times, the world will not pity Israel. So you're seeing the whole tidal wave against Israel, but at the same time, you're seeing the algorithms helping this tidal wave. Why? Just like the algorithms were helping boost up all of the posts about ISIS and about the migrant crisis and about migrants in Europe. Why? Because they wanted nationalism. Why is the algorithm so helpful to anti-Israel posts? Because they want that stuff to spread. They want that stuff to spread because that is going to help fulfill the objective of the powers that be, and that is a revival in nationalism. Look, our countries are working at the behest of Israel, not at the behest of the people. We need a real nationalist government. We need something more extreme than Meloni. We need something more extreme than Farage. We need something more extreme than whoever these other people are. We need something more extreme than Geert Wilders. We need politicians who are true nationalists and who are going to put their volk, their people, first. And I think that's what this is about at the end of the day. It's about basically ushering in a bunch of Hitlers. And it's about doing really a total overhaul of the status quo. Because if you think about it, the migrant crisis in Europe caused something of an overhaul of the status quo. The status quo was that migration was good, immigrants were good, we have to be tolerant, we have to be open to other cultures, we have to be multicultural. And that status quo was completely scraped out as a result of the migrant crisis. So the migrant crisis caused a complete overhaul of that particular status quo when it comes to tolerance and multiculturalism, and when it came to the stigma against nationalism. The migrant crisis and the nationalist backlash to the migrant crisis caused a total overhaul of that status quo. So the anti-Israel movement and the rage against Israel, I believe, is a part of is really a second phase of this overhaul. Now that we have overhauled the whole stigma against nationalism, now we have to overhaul, we have to completely remove and purge out the stigma against anti-Semitism. We have to remove the stigma against Hitler. And we have to bring that back. And this anti-Israel stuff is really bringing that stuff back. It's bringing Hitlerism back. It's making Holocaust denialism very popular. So we're seeing a second phase of the overhaul. Nationalism is no longer stigmatized. Multiculturalism is no longer embraced. It's no longer popular. The idea of tolerance and diversity are no longer popular. Wokeism is dead. So now we're in phase 2 of this awakening, so to speak. And phase 2 is much deeper, because phase 2 is dealing with purging out the stigma against Hitler and against Nazism and against anti-Semitism. And that's what's happening. So be critical of Israel. I'm all for being critical of Israel. I'm very critical of Israel. Israel's doing evil. But please also understand that people are pointing towards Israel's evils to justify another evil, which is trying to revive Nazism. Just keep that in mind. And the reason why I'm stressing on this so much is because when I was writing on ISIS back in 2014 and 2015, I didn't realize that people were using ISIS's evils as a way to revive far-right ideology. I didn't realize it. So I'm learning from my mistakes. I'm learning from my lesson here. And my lesson is, please understand that, yes, evils do exist and they are happening and we should point them out, but also understand that people point them out with bad intentions. And I know for a fact that people are pointing out to the evils of Israel with bad intentions, and that is to revive Hitlerism. So just keep that in mind. Just something to look out for.